investigation into the events at Hinterkaifeck begins not with the discovery of the scene, but with the geographical and social isolation that defined the location. Hinterkaifeck was not a village, but a singular farmstead situated approximately 500 meters from the town of Kaifeck and roughly 1 kilometer from the larger municipality of Wangen. Administrative records from the district of Neuburg and Der Donau describe the property as a remote Einerdhof, a solitary farm, obscured from the main road by a dense section of the Hexenhals forest. The layout of the structures is critical to understanding the timeline established by later inquiries. The residential house was directly connected to the stable and the barn, forming a continuous L-shaped structure that allowed internal transit between the living quarters and the livestock areas without stepping outside. This architectural detail would become a focal point for investigators attempting to reconstruct the movements of individuals on the property. At the time of the incident in 1922, the farm was occupied by 5 permanent residents. The head of the household was Andreas Gruber, aged 63. Records indicate he was a man of significant financial means, but limited social capital. Police files and neighbor testimonies collected in April 1922 describe Gruber as a difficult, solitary figure who maintained a strained relationship with the surrounding community. His wife, Cecilia Gruber, aged 72, also resided on the property. The household included their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, aged 35, and her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. To understand the context of the investigation, one must examine the legal history of the family, as it directly contributed to the procedural failures that occurred later. Court documents from 1915 and 1919 reveal that Andreas Gruber and his daughter Victoria had been subject to criminal proceedings regarding their familial relations. Both were convicted and served time in a correctional facility for incestuous conduct. This legal precedent is vital because it established a perimeter of silence around the farm. The family was socially ostracized, and their deep mistrust of legal authorities suggests why Andreas Gruber failed to contact the police when security anomalies began to manifest in March 1922. The timeline of the events leading up to the incident is reconstructed primarily through witness statements taken by the Munich Police Department regarding the days preceding March 31st. According to these statements, the isolation of the farm began to fracture due to a series of unexplained occurrences. The first documented irregularity concerns the position of domestic staff. The family's previous maid, Crescence Rieger, had terminated her employment 6 months prior. In her statement to investigators, she cited an overwhelming sense of unease, claiming she heard footsteps in the attic and felt she was being watched. While initially dismissed as superstition, these details were later reevaluated as potential indicators of a long-term intrusion. The procedural timeline tightens significantly in late March 1922. Several days before the incident, Andreas Gruber engaged in a conversation with a neighbor regarding strange observations on the property. According to the witness account, Gruber reported finding a set of footprints in the fresh snow. The specific meteorology of the week is relevant here. Snowfall had been heavy, creating a clear record of transit. Gruber noted that the tracks originated from the direction of the forest and led directly to the farm buildings. However, upon inspecting the perimeter, he found no corresponding tracks leading away from the structures. The footprints effectively terminated at the farm. Despite the alarming nature of this discovery, which indicated that an individual had entered the premises and had not exited, Gruber did not file a report with the local gendarmerie. Investigators noted that following the discovery of the footprints, the anomalies escalated. Andreas Gruber reported to the same neighbor that he had heard inexplicable noises emanating from the attic space above the living quarters. The architectural layout of the farm meant that the attic ran the length of the house and the attached barn. During a subsequent search of the premises, Gruber located a newspaper in the house that he did not recognize. It was a publication from Munich, a city located over 70 kilometers away. Postal records confirmed that no one in the household subscribed to this specific periodical, and the local postman testified that he had not delivered it. This physical evidence suggested the presence of an unauthorized individual who had brought external items into the home. Further complicating the security situation was the disappearance of a set of keys. Procedural notes indicate that shortly before the incident, the keys to the main house went missing. This loss compromised the integrity of the dwelling, potentially allowing unrestricted access to the living areas. Additionally, workers and neighbors noted minor disturbances in the physical environment. There were reports of displacement in the cattle shed, suggesting that someone might have been sleeping in the straw. An attempted burglary was also suspected days prior, when scratch marks were found on the lock of the tool shed. Although entry was not gained at that specific time, the investigation also scrutinized the paternity of the youngest child, Joseph. This element is significant as it provides potential motives and expands the list of persons of interest. Vital records list the father as unknown, but local rumors and later interrogations pointed toward a neighbor, Lawrence Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer had initially acknowledged paternity and arranged for alimony payments. But shortly before the child's birth, he retracted this admission, accusing Andreas Gruber of being the father of his own grandson. This dispute resulted in further legal entanglement and heightened tensions between the Hinterkaifeck residents and the nearby village. The existence of the child Joseph and the financial disputes surrounding him were considered relevant context for the emotional climate surrounding the farm. On March 31st, 1922, the final day for which activities can be accounted, the operational status of the farm appeared normal to outside observers. A critical arrival occurred on this date. Maria Baumgartner, a 44-year-old woman, arrived at Hinterkaifeck to begin her first day of employment as the new maid. Her sister accompanied her to the farm in the late afternoon. According to the sister's testimony, she stayed for a brief period to help Maria settle in. She reported that the atmosphere seemed unremarkable. At approximately 5 in the afternoon, Maria's sister departed the farm. She was likely the last person to see the inhabitants before the incident concluded. The chronology of March 31st is further anchored by the activities of the granddaughter, Cecilia. School records confirm she attended classes that day. However, she was absent the following morning, April 1st. The reconstruction of the subsequent hours relies heavily on the forensic analysis of the location and the positions in which the individuals were later found. The autopsy reports, conducted by court physician Dr. Johann Baptist Ammeler, suggest that the fatal sequence began late in the evening of March 31st. Based on the location of the 4 adult individuals and the elder child, investigators theorized a lure mechanism. One by one, 4 of the inhabitants, Andreas, his wife Cecilia, his daughter Victoria, and the 7-year-old granddaughter Cecilia, walked from the main living quarters through the connecting stable and into the barn. The police report indicates that they were not subjected to an assault in the main house. Instead, they appeared to have been drawn to the barn individually or in pairs. Upon entering the structure, each person sustained fatal injuries. The medical examiner noted that the cause of cessation of life for all individuals was severe blunt force trauma to the cranium. The weapon was identified as a mattock, a heavy agricultural tool used for digging and chopping. The precision of the injuries suggested that the individuals were incapacitated immediately upon entry. The silence of the location was maintained, preventing those remaining in the house from raising an alarm. Following the loss of life for the 4 individuals in the barn, the perpetrator or perpetrators moved into the living quarters. Procedural reconstruction places the next event in the maid's chamber. Maria Baumgartner, having been at the residence for only a few hours, was found in her bedroom. She had also sustained fatal trauma. The final phase of the incident occurred in the bedroom of Victoria Gabriel, where where the youngest child, 2-year-old Joseph, was sleeping in a bassinet. The medical report confirms that he also suffered fatal cranial injuries. A significant procedural failure in the case revolves around the gap between the time of the incident and the time of discovery. The deaths occurred on Friday night, March 31st. However, the discovery was not made until Tuesday, April 4th. This 96-hour window represents a critical loss of evidence and a period of baffling activity at the farmstead. During this 4-day interval, several witnesses interacted with the perimeter of the property, yet failed to realize the gravity of the situation. On Saturday, April 1st, 2 coffee sellers arrived at the farm to take an order. Finding no one answering the door, they walked around the yard. They noted that the gate to the machine house was open. They waited for a significant period before leaving. The postman, Joseph Mayer, noted during his rounds on Saturday that the previous day's mail had not been collected. On Sunday, April 2nd, neighbors noticed that no smoke was rising from the chimney, which was initially thought unusual, though other witnesses later contradicted this, claiming smoke was indeed visible, implying someone was inside the house maintaining the fire. The most detailed account of this interim period comes from Albert Hoffner, a mechanic. On Tuesday, April 4th, prior to the discovery, he arrived at Hinterkaifeck to repair the engine of the food chopper. According to his sworn statement, he waited for an hour, shouting for the residents, but received no reply. Assuming they were working in the fields, he began his repairs. He worked on the engine for approximately 4.5 hours. During this time, he noted the presence of the dog, a Spitz, which was barking inside the barn, and then later appeared outside, tied up. Hoffner also reported that the cattle seemed restless, but not starving. After completing the repair, the mechanic started the engine to test it. The noise was significant, yet no resident appeared. Hoffner left the premises without seeing a single person, unaware that he had been working mere yards away from the location of the 4 individuals in the barn. The discovery was finally precipitated by the absence of the young Kazilia from school on Monday and Tuesday. Concerned neighbors, led by Lawrence Schlittenbauer, Jakob Sigel, and Michael Pearl, decided to conduct a welfare check on the afternoon of April 4th. Upon arrival, the search party found the entire farmstead locked. They forced entry into the barn. It was Schlittenbauer who first navigated the dark interior. According to the initial police report, he discovered the 4 individuals in the barn. The bodies of Andreas Gruber, Kazilia Gruber, Victoria Gabriel, and young Kazilia were stacked upon one another and covered with hay. An old door had been placed over the stack to further conceal them. The men then proceeded to the main house. They entered through the connecting hallway. In the maid's room, they discovered Maria Baumgartner lying on her bed. In the adjoining bedroom, they found the infant, Joseph, in his bassinet. The local gendarmerie was notified, but the initial response was sluggish. By the time the Munich Police Commission arrived hours later, the scene had been compromised. Dozens of curious locals had walked through the property, moving items and contaminating the floor with new footprints, making it impossible to distinguish between the perpetrator's tracks and those of the neighbors. Matters of scene preservation were further neglected due to the logistical challenges of the era. Investigating officers, rather than sealing the perimeter, spent the night in the farmhouse. They utilized the kitchen to prepare food and slept in the beds of the individuals who had just been removed. This contamination made subsequent forensic analysis of the living quarters nearly impossible. The initial police log notes that the cattle were unsettled, prompting the officers to feed the livestock during their stay, further altering the state of the barn. The autopsy reports filed by Dr. Ommler provided a clinical and harrowing timeline of the final moments. While most of the individuals succumbed instantly to the massive trauma, the report for the 7-year-old Kazilia noted that she had survived the initial impact for several hours. Tufts of hair were found in her hands, suggesting she had pulled them out in a state of extreme distress while lying in the hay among her family members before succumbing to shock and injury. Forensic analysis of the scene revealed further procedural anomalies. Investigators found remnants of a meal eaten in the kitchen recently, likely by the perpetrators during their stay. The beds had been slept in after the incident. The cattle and the dog had been fed regularly. The bread supply had been consumed. This evidence points to a perpetrator who was familiar with farm operations and felt comfortable enough to reside at the location of the fatal incident for days. The inventory of the house revealed contradictory evidence regarding the motive, while the brutality of the event suggested a personal grievance. The initial theory leaned toward robbery. However, Rien Gruber's team located significant assets during their search. In a cupboard, they found paper currency, gold marks, and coinage of substantial value. The fact that such easily accessible wealth was left behind led investigators to doubt robbery as the primary objective. The investigation was further hampered by jurisdictional and forensic failures common to the era, in a decision that would later prove detrimental to cold case reviews. The skulls of the 6 individuals were surgically removed during the autopsy process. Dr. Ommler sent these biological specimens to Munich for further examination by clairvoyants, a desperate and scientifically dubious step authorized by the authorities of the time. These specimens were never returned to the gravesite, According to archive management records, the skulls were lost during the chaos of the Second World War, likely destroyed during Allied operations, rendering modern forensic testing impossible. Attention turned to the complex interpersonal dynamics of the family. Records show that Inspector Rien Gruber interviewed Lawrence Schlittenbauer extensively. Schlittenbauer became a person of interest due to his behavior at the scene. Witnesses stated that, upon finding the individuals in the barn, Schlittenbauer demonstrated a surprising familiarity with the layout and moved the heavy door covering the forms with unusual ease. Furthermore, he was observed interacting with the farm animals as if he knew their routine. However, despite intense questioning and local suspicion, no physical evidence directly linked him to the fatal injuries, and he maintained his innocence throughout the inquiry. In 1923, with no definitive suspect in custody, the investigation stalled. The property itself was ordered to be demolished. Investigators utilized this demolition as a final opportunity to search for the weapon. It was during the deconstruction of the farmhouse that the laborers discovered the mattock concealed in the attic floor, near the chimney stack. The tool contained biological residue consistent with the individuals found in the barn. Also found was a penknife belonging to the family. This discovery confirmed that the perpetrator had access to the attic and may have been observing the family from that vantage point prior to the incident. Throughout the decades following 1922, the Munich police maintained an open file on Hinterkaifeck. Over 100 suspects were interviewed, ranging from local farmers to traveling vagrants. One theory examined involved a soldier returning from the war who might have held a grudge against the family. But military records failed to provide a match for the timeline. Another angle focused on the political instability of the region, suggesting the event might have been a politically motivated act by extremist groups. But the lack of stolen weaponry at the farm dismantled this hypothesis. Ultimately, the Hinterkaifeck investigation remains a case study in the limitations of early 20th century forensics. The records exist as a catalog of tangible facts: the mattock, the timeline of the smoke, the fed cattle, and the missing keys. Yet, the connective tissue that would identify the responsible party remains absent. The file was never officially closed, but the demolition of the physical structure and the loss of the biological evidence ensured that the inquiry could proceed no further. The 6 family members were buried in a plot in the Waidhofen Cemetery without their craniums. A monument now stands near the location where the farm once existed, marking the site of the tragedy. To this day, the records remain in the Bavarian State Archives, detailing a case defined by the negative space in the evidence, the fingerprints that were never lifted, and the footprints that were were swept away.